The word hit before the shove did, and it stayed longer. Servants don't sit at the family table. Get up. For one suspended second, nobody in the ballroom moved. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to waiting mouths. Forks hovered above china. 80 people, family, friends, neighbors. My father's former co-workers watched me lose my balance beside the head table at Walter Hale's retirement party. Then, my father put his hand on my shoulder and pushed. I hit the polished floor hard enough for pain to crack through my hip and climb my side beneath the navy dress my mother used to save for special nights. The room blurred. All I could see were chair legs, polished shoes, and the hem of Pamela's champagne-colored gown as she stepped back so I wouldn't touch her. My name is Gwendolyn Hale. I am 39 years old, and until that night, I had spent half my life telling myself my father's silence was grief, not rejection. "Walter," someone said from the back. "What the hell are you doing?" Pamela answered before he did, her voice warm and polished, as if she were rescuing an awkward toast instead of watching me on the floor. "Please, everyone, let's not make this uglier than it already is. Gwendolyn has always had a talent for turning private matters into public scenes." I pushed up on one hand. Everett was beside me instantly. "Don't rush it," he said quietly. Anger packed so tight it had gone cold. "Take my arm." I took it and stood. Walter didn't look shocked by what he had done. He looked like a man who had finally said something out loud after rehearsing it in silence for years. "You should never have come," he said. I stared at him. "I'm your daughter." His face tightened. "No," he said. "You're not." A murmur moved through the room like a chill. Pamela touched his sleeve lightly. "Walter, maybe this isn't the place." "No." His voice rose. "Let her hear it here. Let everyone hear it. She has no place at this table." Across from him, Sabrina froze with her wineglass halfway to her lips, looking shocked a second too late. Every eye in the room waited for me to break. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and asked, "Is that what you really believe Walter held my gaze?" "It's what I know." Everett stepped forward, one hand still at my back. "Then be careful," he said softly. "Because before this night is over, everyone in this room may find out how little you were told." The silence deepened, and from somewhere near the last table, a silver-haired woman whispered the words that turned my blood cold. "Pamela has been afraid of this night for years. Stories like this don't belong to one family alone. They happen quietly, in different forms, in more homes than people like to admit. This story is written by the author of Revenge Pulse, inspired by those patterns, not any one real person." I turned toward the voice. Pulse hammering. What had Pamela been afraid I might finally learn? My mother had been gone less than a year when Pamela changed the wall above the mantel. For as long as I could remember, that space had held one framed photograph of my parents on a windy beach in North Carolina, my mother laughing into the air. My father looking at her like the rest of the world had gone quiet. One Friday afternoon, I came home from school and found it gone. In its place hung a gold-framed painting of white flowers in a glass vase. "Do you like it?" Pamela asked from the doorway. Shopping bag looped over one wrist. The room needed something lighter. I stared at the clean patch of paint where the old nail hole had been covered. "Where's my mother's picture?" Pamela smiled gently. "In the hallway. This house can't feel like a shrine forever." Walter was at the kitchen table, boots still on from work, rubbing his forehead with one hand. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. That was how it began, not with shouting. Not with one dramatic act cruel enough for everyone to name, just small changes that sounded reasonable if you said them softly enough. My chair disappeared next. It had been mine since I was 10, after I complained that the taller dining chairs made my feet hang awkwardly. Pamela replaced the old mismatched set with 6 identical cream-upholstered chairs and smiled like she had improved all our lives. "We're making the house more cohesive," she said. Later. My bedroom began changing in ways so gradual they almost made me feel foolish for noticing. My books were boxed. My winter clothes were moved to the garage. My mother's quilt disappeared from the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Storage, Pamela said when I asked. You hardly use these things. Then, Sabrina started spending more time at the house. She did not take space loudly. She filled it gracefully. She laughed at Walter's stories, brought him coffee before he asked, listened with bright eyes whenever he talked about work, and somehow slipped into the exact spaces grief had hollowed out inside him. One Saturday, I came home from college and found my suitcase already sitting on the front porch. Pamela opened the door only halfway. We have guests using your room. I looked past her at Walter. He saw the suitcase. He saw my face. He saw all of it. And still, he said nothing. That was the day I understood I was not just being left out. I was being removed. Later that night, Pamela found me in the garage beside my boxes and my mother's old things. She looked me straight in the eye and let the sweetness fall from her face. One day, she said, Walter will say out loud what I already know. She leaned closer. That you no longer belong in this family. 2 weeks before the retirement party, Everett started stepping outside to take calls he didn't explain. Not enough to feel like secrecy, just enough to feel like something was shifting. One night, I found him in the driveway after dark, his voice low, one hand braced against the car. No, he said, not a summary. I need what actually happened. When he saw me, he ended the call. Everything okay, I asked. He hesitated, not hiding, not lying, just choosing what I was ready to carry. Some things in your family, he said carefully, don't belong to memory anymore. I waited. They belong to facts. I could have asked more. I didn't. By then, hope felt like something you paid for in advance, and I had already spent too much on things that never came back. So, when he grew quieter in the days leading up to the party, more watchful, more certain, I told myself it had nothing to do with me. Standing in that ballroom, I realized how wrong that was. Behind the head table, a slideshow played across the projector screen. Walter shaking hands at work. Walter cutting ribbons. Walter on a fishing dock. Walter at Christmas with Pamela and Sabrina. Walter at Thanksgiving with Pamela and Sabrina. Walter standing in front of the house I grew up in with Pamela and Sabrina. Not one photo of my mother. Not one photo of me. Pamela lifted her glass, smiling with effortless grace. And to Sabrina, she said, the daughter who stayed. A few people clapped. Aunt Elise looked at me, then quickly down at her napkin. My cousin Brent shifted in his seat like he wanted to disappear. No one said anything. That was when I understood. This wasn't a retirement party. It was the final version of a story I had already been written out of. Pamela crossed the floor toward us, pearls catching the light. I think it would be best, she said gently, if you and Everett left before you make this evening any more uncomfortable. Everett stood slowly. He looked at the screen, then at Walter, then at Pamela. You've had years to keep things quiet, he said. His voice didn't rise. But silence doesn't make something untrue. The room seemed to tighten, and for the first time that night, Pamela's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Pamela didn't react right away. That was what made it unsettling. Most people flinch when something dangerous is said out loud. Pamela simply tilted her head, as if Everett had made a minor social misstep. I'm not sure what you think you're implying, she said lightly. A voice behind me answered. I think he's being careful. I turned. The woman walking toward us had silver hair cut neatly at her jaw and the kind of posture that comes from years of standing in rooms where other people fall apart. It took me a second to place her. Then it hit me. Celeste, I said. She nodded once. Celeste Arden, my mother's friend. Something in Pamela's expression shifted, not panic, not yet, but recognition. Celeste stopped beside us, close enough that her voice didn't have to carry. I didn't come here to speak. She said, I told myself this wasn't my place anymore. Her eyes moved to me. But some things don't stay buried just because we stop talking about them. My throat tightened. What do you mean? Celeste drew a slow breath. I was working at St. Bartholomew's the week you were born. Pamela gave a soft, dismissive laugh. That was decades ago. People remember things incorrectly all the time. Celeste didn't look at her. I remember that week, she said calmly, because something didn't sit right with me, even then. The room around us faded. What didn't sit right? I asked. Celeste's gaze held mine. There was a mix-up in the nursery records, a bracelet number that didn't match where it should have. It was small, easy to overlook. My chest tightened. A bracelet. She nodded. On a newborn. Everett spoke quietly. And you never forgot it. No, Celeste said, because I almost said something at the time. And then I didn't. Pamela's voice cut in, sharper now. This is inappropriate. You're dragging up half-remembered details from decades ago before she could finish. Sabrina appeared at her side. There you are, she said quickly to Celeste. Mom's been looking for you. Her hand reached for Celeste's arm. Too fast. Too deliberate. Not confusion. Fear. Celeste gently stepped back, out of her reach. Then she took my hand instead. If someone went looking for those records years later, she said quietly, it wasn't out of curiosity. Her fingers tightened around mine. It was because they already knew something didn't add up. Everett didn't make a speech. He stepped forward, opened the envelope, and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between Walter's glass and Pamela's folded napkin. What is this? Walter asked. Everett didn't look at him. Something that should have been said a long time ago. Pamela moved first. Richard, this is unnecessary. Let me see it, Walter said. He picked up the paper. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched the moment they slowed, then stopped. Something in his face emptied out. No, he said quietly. The word barely reached the table. No. My chest tightened. What is it? He looked up at me, and for the first time that night, there was no anger in his eyes, no distance, just something breaking open. It says, his voice faltered, then steadied. It says I may never have been your father at all. The words didn't land like an answer. They landed like something unfinished. The room seemed to draw in a breath and hold it. Pamela recovered first. Well, she said, too quickly. Then that explains quite a lot, doesn't it? I turned to her slowly. She faced the room, smoothing the moment into something presentable. This is painful, of course, but perhaps it clarifies why Gwendolyn has always seemed out of place. Out of place. The words didn't hurt the way she intended. They landed colder than that, because suddenly, the question wasn't who I was. It was who had decided that for me. No, Celeste said sharply. She stepped forward before Pamela could continue. That explains very little, she said. It doesn't explain what happened at the hospital. Pamela's voice tightened. There was no what happened. Celeste didn't look at her. There was a discrepancy the night Gwendolyn was born, a detail that didn't line up the way it should have. Walter turned toward her slowly. Are you saying I'm saying, Celeste cut in, that this didn't start with Gwendolyn, and it didn't start tonight? She looked at me. It started before you were old enough to remember anything at all. The room went still. Walter's hand tightened around the paper. His gaze moved from me to Pamela. And this time, it wasn't rejection. It was doubt. For the first time in years, something in the story he believed about our family had cracked. Everett didn't rush. He slid the rest of the documents onto the table, not like a performance like someone finishing a sentence. "This didn't stop with the past," he said. It continued. Pamela folded her arms. "You're trying to turn confusion into something it isn't." He ignored her. "The house," he said, tapping the first page, "was being prepared to pass entirely to Sabrina." Walter's head snapped up. "What?" Pamela answered quickly. "It's a draft. People make plans. A plan that removes Gwendolyn completely," Everett said. Silence settled over the table. He moved to the next page. The retirement accounts were being redirected. The majority set aside for Sabrina. Walter looked at her. On what basis? Pamela's tone sharpened. On the basis that she's the one who stayed. The one who's been here. Everett didn't argue. He just set down the final document. "And this," he said, "would have given Pamela full control over everything once you retired. The house, the timing, the transfers." A murmur spread through the room. Not loud. Just enough to break the illusion that this was still a normal evening. Walter stared at the papers, then at Pamela. "You never showed me this." "They're drafts," she said tightly. "Nothing was finalized." "Not yet," Everett replied, but close enough that tonight mattered. I could see it now. Not chaos, not desperation. A sequence. A version of the future built one quiet decision at a time until I no longer existed inside it. Not a mistake. A replacement. Pamela exhaled sharply. "You came here for money. That's what this is." The accusation hung in the air. I didn't answer her. I turned to Sabrina. "Did you know I asked?" Her lips parted. "Know what? That my name was being taken out of everything." Her eyes flicked to Pamela, then away. Walter saw it. "Answer her," he said. Sabrina tried, failed, looked down. That silence said more than anything she could have chosen. Pamela stepped forward. "My daughter doesn't owe, she does if she knew." I said. Pamela lifted her chin. "And I never touched any hospital records. So stop trying to twist this into something it isn't." The room went quiet again. Celeste spoke without raising her voice. "You went back," she said. Pamela didn't move. "To the archives." Celeste continued. "Years after that night." A pause. Then, softer. "You didn't go looking for answers." Her eyes held Pamela's. "You went looking because you already knew there was something to find." Pamela held her composure for exactly 3 seconds. Then, something in her expression tightened just enough for the room to feel it. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "I accessed records because Richard had questions about family history. That doesn't mean I found anything, and it certainly doesn't mean I did anything wrong." Walter didn't respond. He was looking at her the way you look at something you thought you understood, and suddenly don't. Pamela turned to him quickly, softening her tone. "Richard, listen to me. After Linda died, you were falling apart. I held everything together. The house, the meals, the schedules, everything you couldn't bring yourself to face." "You mean you decided everything?" Everett said. She ignored him. "I protected this family." The word hung there. Protected. Celeste's voice came quiet but firm. From what Pamela's control slipped a fraction. From unnecessary damage. From dragging up things that would only hurt people. There was no reason to reopen some old issue with a hospital bracelet and a mislabeled bassinet. She stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Pamela didn't move, but everyone in the room felt it. Celeste spoke first. She didn't raise her voice. "I never mentioned a bassinet." Pamela's eyes flicked toward her. "Just once. It was enough." Walter turned his head slowly toward his wife. Not angry, not shouting, something worse. "How would you know that he asked?" Pamela opened her mouth. Celeste said. "No," Celeste said. "I didn't." The sound of Sabrina setting her glass down cracked through the silence. Her hand was shaking. Pamela reached for her. Sabrina, tell them. Tell them I was trying to protect us. Sabrina pulled her arm back, not violently, just enough that everyone saw it. Mom, she whispered, and for the first time that night, she didn't sound confident. She sounded afraid. Pamela's mask didn't shatter. It slipped, enough for the anger underneath to show. Walter kept looking at her like he no longer recognized the person standing beside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the room leaned toward it. How long, he asked. Then, softer, how long have you known Walter looked older? Not tired. Changed. He turned toward the musicians near the wall. Stop! The violin cut off mid-note. He looked toward the service staff. Hold dinner. The room obeyed. 80 people. Silent again. Walter drew in a slow breath, then turned back to the table. His hand closed around the empty chair beside him, the one I had reached for before he pushed me away. He pulled it out. This was your place, he said, his voice rough. It should never have been taken from you. No one spoke. Not Pamela. Not Sabrina. Not even Everett. I stared at the chair, the polished wood, the untouched plate, the space that had been mine, until it wasn't. A seat can be offered back in a second. That doesn't mean you get back the years it was taken. Walter held it there. Gwendolyn, please. I saw it then. Not authority, not certainty, regret. I walked forward slowly, not like someone coming home, like someone deciding whether to step into something that had already broken once. I sat down slowly, like I was accepting something that should never have been taken in the first place. The room exhaled, glasses lowered, shoulders shifted. People wanted to believe the worst part was over. Pamela didn't. She stepped forward before the silence could turn into forgiveness. Richard, she said, her voice smooth again, controlled again. Whatever confusion we're dealing with tonight, the decisions you made about your estate are separate from this. Walter looked at her. She continued. You chose those changes. You understood them. Emotion doesn't undo that. Everett didn't sit. He stayed where he was, watching Walter. You're still missing it, he said quietly. Walter's hand tightened on the back of his own chair. Everett's voice didn't rise. If those decisions were made while you were being misled about who belonged in your own family, he let the words settle. Then everything built on that can fall apart just as quickly. Everett didn't raise his voice. He took out his phone. Pamela saw it and stepped forward immediately. No, you are not turning this into a spectacle. Everett didn't argue. He simply unlocked the screen. Too late, he said. He set the phone on the table. The call connected almost instantly. Thomas Wren. Everett didn't waste time. Tom, you have what I sent. I sent it earlier. Everett added, I just didn't know if we'd need it tonight. A brief pause. I do, the voice replied. Calm, certain, and I've already acted. Walter leaned forward slightly. Tom, what does that mean? It means, Thomas said, nothing gets moved tonight. Nothing gets signed. Nothing changes hands. The room stilled. Walter frowned. Be specific. The house, the accounts, any revisions that were being prepared, a beat. All of it is frozen until we understand exactly what decisions were made and why. Pamela stepped in sharply. You can't do that based on speculation and half-heard accusations at a party. I'm not making final decisions. Thomas replied evenly. I'm preventing irreversible ones. Silence spread outward from the table. Sabrina's breath caught beside her mother. Walter's eyes didn't leave the phone. Why would anything need to be stopped? Another pause. Then Thomas said it. Because if decisions about your estate were influenced by incomplete or misleading information about your family, he let the sentence settle. then those decisions may not reflect your intent. That was all it took. Not a long explanation. Just the truth, placed carefully where it couldn't be ignored. Walter's face went pale, not because of the money, because he finally understood what had almost happened. Not just what he could have lost, but what he had almost agreed to erase. Pamela tried to speak again. "Richard, don't listen to," but no one was listening anymore. Not the guests, not Sabrina, not even him. When the room fell completely still, Walter turned toward me. His voice, when it came, was quieter than I had ever heard it. "After tonight," he said, "after what I said to you." He hesitated. "Would you still want to be a Hale?" Walter didn't answer his own question. For a moment, he just stood there, one hand on the table, as if he no longer trusted himself to move without breaking something else. Then he turned not to me, but to the room. "My daughter is not a liar," he said. The words came rough, stripped clean. "She didn't come here for money, and she is not a servant." No one spoke. Walter swallowed. "I said that about her. I said it in front of all of you." His voice tightened. "And I pushed her like she didn't belong in my life." He exhaled slowly. "I saw things changing in my own house, and I chose not to ask questions, because not knowing was easier than being wrong. I let silence do the work for me. That was the truth. Not one moment, years of them." Pamela let out a short, brittle laugh. "Richard, don't do this." He turned to her, and something final closed in his expression. "No," he said, "you don't get to decide what this is anymore." He picked up the phone. "Tom, nothing moves forward without review. Not one document." "Understood," Thomas replied. "Everything stays as it was until you say otherwise." Pamela's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time that night, she had nothing to control. "You're choosing her over your own family?" she asked. Walter shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I'm realizing who my family was before I stopped paying attention." Sabrina wiped at her face. She looked at me once, really looked like she was seeing something she had chosen not to see before. Then she lowered her eyes. Without a word, she picked up her bag and walked out. Pamela followed a second later. The room stayed silent behind them. Walter looked at me again, carefully, like he was afraid of getting it wrong. He pulled the chair out once more. This time, I stepped toward it on my own. I rested my hand on the back and let the moment sit between us. "You can give a seat back in one night," I said. I met his eyes, but it takes much longer to understand what it meant when it was taken away. I didn't sit. Not yet, because some things don't come back just because the truth finally does. Families don't always break in one moment. Sometimes it happens slowly through silence, small decisions, and the things no one chooses to question. And sometimes healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with naming what was done, out loud, for the first time. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments when a family teaches itself to forget you. Do you fight to be seen again, or do you finally walk away?